I think we all know it. Our democracy and our future are imperiled like never before in our lifetimes. Our president is an authoritarian. His regime is using violence to cultivate fear and to scapegoat those at the margins. And we alternate between outrage and despair and efforts to cultivate resilience. We want justice. We want peace. We want beloved community where every being is treated with the love and respect that they deserve. But how do we get there? What is our path, our next step? In times like these, I think it's helpful to consult our spiritual ancestors, our wisdom teachers. One such ancestor and teacher comes to mind as Howard Thurman, grandson of a slave, nature mystic, pastor, preacher, author of 22 books, and spiritual mentor to Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. He spent a lot of time thinking and praying about the relationship between spirituality and social justice. And he has a lot to say, I think, as we struggle through our current situation. And I may add, he did so in the language of his time, using masculine pronouns for both God and humans. So please pardon my use of that language when I quote him during this homily. Howard Thurman said that if we want real transformation, we must begin deep inside ourselves. He called it the altar of the heart. For Thurman, every human being carries within them a sacred interior space, a place where God longs to come alive, a place of conscience and depth and encounter. But he was painfully clear that this altar can easily become obstructed. He called these obstructions the maze of particulars that are endemic to our human lives. So what are some of these maze of particulars that obstruct our access to the altar of the heart? Well, fear obstructs access. Financial insecurity certainly obstructs it. Trauma, addictions obstruct it. Each of us has our own collection of obstructions, and that is why Thurman says the mystic begins with himself. Before confronting injustice, the mystic addresses his or her own altar. Before naming the obstructions in society, she names the obstructions within. Because activism without inner freedom simply recreates the same distortions in a new form. And once we turn outward, Thurman's focus on the altar of the heart leads him to make a surprising claim about the purpose of social action. He says, the mystic's concern with the imperative of social action is not merely to improve the condition of society, is not merely to feed the hungry, not merely to relieve human suffering and human misery. If this were all, in and of itself, it would be important, surely. The basic consideration, though, has to do with the removal of all that prevents God from coming to himself in the life of the individual. Whatever there is that blocks this calls for action. Thurman is saying that the purpose of social action is not to create equality or to pay reparations for past wrongs or something like that, but rather to create enough economic security and freedom such that each person has a real opportunity to encounter the divine within. For Thurman, justice is holy because it protects access to the altar of the heart. But Thurman goes even further. The mystic's obligation is not only toward the victims of injustice, it is also toward the perpetrators. Both, he says, are cut off from their own altars. The oppressed suffer these obstructions. The oppressor, Thurman says, suffers distortion, for the problematic maze of particulars includes anxiety and disconnection from others and the web, all of which comes from engaging in what Thurman says is greed and manipulation and exploitation. Thurman asserted that in order to help a person whose wealth and power have obstructed their access to their altar, the only viable solution is, quote, an emergence of a conscious sense of community among the masses that will, quote, shock the oppressor into a state of upheaval and insecurity. What is important to the mystic, Thurman says, is that the purpose of the shock treatment is to hold before the offender a mirror that registers an image of himself and that reflects the image of those who suffer at his hands. The goal is not humiliation or teaching a lesson. The goal is awakening. And as for the means for accomplishing this, Thurman says that violence is never acceptable. He suggests boycotts and civil disobedience. And if all methods of action fail, Thurman dares to say that, quote, the ultimate logic of social action may be some form of martyrdom, not as spectacle or heroism, but because at long last it may be what must be done, quote, to save his own soul and to keep free and easy access to his own altar and his own heart. A shocking claim, but one that makes some sense given that Thurman wrote this in the 1970s after watching Martin Luther King Jr. and others be murdered. And then Thurman sums it all up. And this, after all, is the only thing that matters, that God may come to himself in his creations, a time when God will be all in all. That is the vision. Justice is not only social repair, it is divine fulfillment. I'm reminded of a sermon by Thurman that takes this promise even deeper. He said, every living thing belongs to every other living thing. And I can never be what I ought to be until the last living manifestation of life is what it ought to be. For better or for worse, I am tied into the idiom of everything that lives. If I remember this, I come to myself in you, and you come to yourself in me. This is not metaphor. This is the reality of our interdependence. Your diminishment diminishes me. Your awakening enlarges me. And the earth's suffering contracts us all. Beloved community, then, is not a moral preference. It is the recognition of how reality works. I come to myself in you, and you come to yourself in me, which means that tending the altar is never entirely private. When fear dominates my altar, fear moves in the field that we all share. And when resentment dominates my altar, resentment spreads through the web of mutuality. But when love has room to breathe in me, something of that love becomes available to you. And when justice removes the obstructions that crush your soul, it enlarges mine as well. This is why the mystic starts with himself, not to stay there, but because life itself moves through relationship. We cannot become what we are meant to be until the last living manifestation of life has the space to become what it is meant to be. So here's the invitation. Address your own altar. Work on your baggage, not because it's your duty, and not so you can avoid the struggle outside, but so that God may be able to come alive in you. And then act in some way to remove what blocks that same life in others. Act for the hungry, for the oppressed, for the earth in some small way, maybe a large way. Act even to awaken the offender, because every living thing belongs to every other living thing. And we come to ourselves together. May we keep our altars clear. May we remove what blocks life. And may God come to God's self in us until God is all and all. Amen, and blessed be.